Hey everybody, welcome back. What we are going to be learning today is how to find the equation of a line given a graph and how to write it in slope-intercept form. Here's the first example we are going to be looking at. We have a line here with points that are already highlighted for you. So you can see over here, 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 and here that it's already telling you, hey, those aren't going to give you decimal values. Those are whole numbers. They're nice to work with. But not every line I give you is going to have that. You have to be able to find them yourself. So to write an equation in slope-intercept form, you need to find the slope. Remember, that's m, and your y-intercept, that's b. First things first, y-intercept is the simplest to find if it's a whole number, not a decimal, if it's a whole number. Remember, the y-intercept just means where in the world does your line cross the y-axis. So where do these two lines cross each other? Well, they cross each other right here at that 5. So my y-intercept is in fact 5 here. So let's keep track of this. So y-intercept for b is 5. We still need to find the slope though. So if you remember, for that, slope is found by doing rise over run. So how far up and down are you moving in comparison to how far left and right are you moving? So we can make a line for that as well. Move from one point to the next, starting from the leftmost point and moving to the right. Remember, just how you read a book, from left to right. So if we start from this point, figure out how far up or down do you have to move to get to your next point. Well, in this case, we're going to move down 2. So that is our rise, down 2. And then our run, so how far left or right, is 1. So anytime you move down, that is a negative number. If you moved up, it would have been positive, but because we're moving down, it is negative. And if you move right, it is positive. See how when we're moving right, we're moving into the positive numbers down here? Same concept. If we kept moving down, we're moving into the negative numbers. So down -2 over +1. So if we write that in our text box, looks like I have to create a new one. So we went down 2 and over 1. That can actually be simplified. So -2 divided by 1 is just -2. Now we can use these two pieces to write our formula. Remember, we need to write it as y equals mx plus b. Well, y just stays the same. Our slope we found, m, is -2. And then our intercept at the y-axis was a +5. And that would be your equation. So you'll see here y equals -2x plus 5 describes this graph. And you should notice that because we're moving downwards, that we have a negative slope. That should kind of clue you in there. And that our starting point was on the 5. Our next example here, the y-intercept is a little trickier. You might be able to guess. It looks like it's a -1/2 where it's crossing the y-axis right here. But you can't know that for sure. So we're going to have to use that formula that you learned in our previous video. So let's actually focus on slope first. So I'm going to highlight some points that we can use. So that point right there, it's already highlighted for you. But the next available point that we could use is located right here. And then the next one that'll give you whole numbers is right here. So all of these are points on a line, but we're looking specifically for the whole number options. So in order to find our slope, remember rise over run. Well, in this case, it looks like we're going to have a negative slope again because we have to move in a downwards direction. So we're moving down 1 and over 2. Down 1 over 2. So each time to get from one whole point to the next whole point, we're moving in a downwards direction and then to the right. So our slope here, since we're moving down 1, would be -1 divided by 2, or -1/2. So let's record that. So our slope, we went down 1 over 2. Negative 1/2, I would just leave it as the fraction. There's no reason to turn that into a decimal. It starts to get a little messy that way. All right, we now need to find our y-intercept, which we had a guess for, but we're not 100% positive on. So we're going to use that equation that we learned in the last video. So if I create a new box here, the equation, if you remember, is y minus y1 equals m multiplied by x minus x1. Okay? The y1 and x1 values are your points on your line. And so we can pick any of the points that we circled from earlier. So if I just select, say, this one over here, I want this point. Well, my x value is -3, and then my y value is 1. So I can plug those into my equation that I have over here. So we have y minus my y1 value is 1. We figured out our slope is -1/2. And then we have x minus our x1 value is -3. So here's some simplifying that we're going to have to do. My -1/2 times x minus -3 can be simplified because two negatives in there, that x minus a -3 can turn into a positive instead. That's just going to simplify things a little bit down the road. Then we can distribute that -1/2 inside. Remember, distribution is just multiplication. So we're going to do -1/2 times x and -1/2 times 3. But that y minus 1 on the front is just going to stay there. So -1/2 times x is -1/2 x. And then -1/2 times 3. I'm going to let you think about that for a second. Did you get it? So think about it this way, 1/2 of 3. Half of 3 is 1.5, and since it's a negative, we're going to put that subtraction sign in there. So again, you could write this as 3/2. Doesn't much matter if you write it as a fraction or a decimal. Now we need to get y by itself, which means we need to get rid of this -1. So let's add 1 to both sides. Now you got to think, are you adding 1 to the x? Or are you adding 1 to the constant? Well, since this does not have an x, you should not be combining it with the x. So when we add 1, you're adding it to this -1.5. What is -1.5 plus 1? Well, if you do that, you should get -0.5, or what we guessed earlier, -1/2. So this is in the negatives and it is halfway between 0 and -1. So our guess earlier actually is correct. Our y-intercept is -1/2. So you can leave it like this, y equals -1/2 x minus 1/2. Or if you prefer the decimal versions, that's fine. You can do -0.5 x minus 0.5. And that's all it is for this one. All right, we have a horizontal line example here, and we need to know the equation for it. This one's a little weird. Right away, though, you should notice what our y-intercept is. So you'll see here our intercept is crossing our y-axis at 3. So we know our y-intercept. Remember our b value, that is 3. But slope is a little strange here because notice how it's completely flat. This is another example from our last video. See if you can remember it. So if it's a flat line, what is our slope going to be? Well, there's a way to figure it out if you don't remember for sure. You're like, I'm not quite sure what that means. Well, in this case, think about rise over run. If we look at one point and the next point, so if we're going from here to here, how much are we rising? Well, we're not rising at all. There is no up or down to it. So we could say our rise is 0. And then our run to get from this point to this point is 1. Well, what is 0 divided by 1? You can put it in a calculator, or you should know by now that 0 divided by anything is still 0. So that's our slope. So if you have a flat line like this, there's no slope, there's no hills, no ups or downs to it at all. So our slope here is in fact 0. So let's plug this into our actual equation. So we have y equals our slope times x plus our intercept. This looks a little strange though, so why would you put 0x? Well, what is 0 times anything? It doesn't matter what we put in for x, it's still going to be 0. So there's no point in putting 0 there. So just chop it out, completely remove it. There's no reason to have it. So our equation for this line is just y equals 3, because no matter what our x values are, y is always 3. All right, let's take a look at our final example. We have a vertical line here, and we need to find the equation of it. The concept here is very similar to our past line. If our past line, which had no slope, and it was horizontal, was y equals 3, take a guess at what this could be. Go ahead and pause the video and think about it for a second, but I'm just going to go ahead and continue. So here, we do not have a y-intercept. There's nothing we can write down. There's no crossing the y-axis. We do have an x value, but we don't have a y value. So then we should think, okay, then what's our slope? We can think about our slope like this, same way we did on the last one. So slope is rise over run. So let's move from this point to this point. Well, we're rising 1 to get from one point to the next. That's fine. But then what's our run? How far are we moving left or right to get from here to here? Well, we're not moving left or right. So that is 0. What did we say about dividing by 0? Go ahead and put that in a calculator and it should get mad at you and give you something like this. Remember, that means it is undefined. There's no definition here for slope because it looks like you're trying to scale a wall of a building, which does not make sense. Our slope is undefined and we don't have a y-intercept. So in this case, our equation is going to be pretty simplistic. It is just going to be x equals -2. We don't have a y value here. It's just on our x-axis at the -2 marker. No matter where I touch on this line, x is always going to be -2. So that would be your final answer. All right, go ahead and make sure you got all of those notes down. Go back in the video if you need anything else. Make sure you bring questions tomorrow. Good luck.